The Rebel Capitalist Show.
We had a conversation maybe a couple weeks ago, and you brought something to my attention I really hadn't researched very much. And this was this great reset that the IMF and the World Economic Forum saying we want to change the entire society. We want a global reset and never go back to the way things were. I mean, it's very creepy if you listen to what they say. Their videos are just on YouTube. So can you walk us through, maybe the listeners or viewers that don't know what I'm talking about, can you get them up to speed on this great reset, and then what you think their objectives are, and then what the end game might be?
Well, I'll do my best, but getting them up to speed, I mean, basically, central banks have no tools left because their biggest tool is interest rate, and you basically have the world anchored at zero. And there's only so much debt, whether you're a government, a corporation, or an individual. At some point, you have to do something with that debt, whether it's, service it, pay it, or default on it. So when you're in this kind of circumstance, the current system does not work. They need to put in a brand new system, and that's the reset. Now, where we are in it is there is currently a bill going through both, this is really interesting, George, Congress and the Senate simultaneously, which is not something that I think happens very often. So It's fast-tracked, and it's called Banking for All, where the Federal Reserve will actually create a digital money, and it's called, surprisingly enough, because they got to keep things as close to the same as possible, but this is the new money, the digital dollar. Right? They did the same thing back in 1913 when you had the gold certificates. It was $1, and after they installed the Federal Reserve, it was still $1. They did the same thing in 71. It was $1 before they took gold out of the equation, and it was $1 afterwards. So they know they have to keep everything the same. Now, in that one paper, which is really one of my favorites, or I don't know that it's my favorite, but they gave you such a beautiful 18-step outline of how they could transition us from a paper dollar system to a digital dollar system. Excuse me. And this bill is number 8 on that list.
Who put out this list, Lynette?
The IMF in breaking below the lower zero bound.
Oh, right.
Which is how you go below zero, and you can attack principal, which is one of the big threats in a digital currency. So right now in a paper currency, there's only 2 digits past that you can go. So, you have 100 pennies make $1. Well, once you go down to zero, you can't go any lower. But in a digital system, that's infinitely divisible. And the other big piece that people don't realize is that it gives the central bank direct and immediate control and their vision to see if their policy choices are doing what they want. So, for example, this recent stimulus check of the $1,200.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people saved that money, and we saw the savings rate spike to 33%, when what the government wanted, what the central banks wanted, was for people to go out and spend that money and stimulate the economy.
Right.
Now, once it's in a digital wallet, but it's still a digital dollar, well, then they have the ability to go below zero. And after that one piece, they did another piece on how to take it deeply below zero using a 4% as an example. So you've got this bank account and you have $1,000 in it, let's just say, and you're not spending any money, but you're now going deeply negative, and you're just watching your principal evaporate. What are you likely to do? likely to go out and spend it on anything that you think can retain its value better than in the bank.
Right.
And that's hyperinflation. So, I mean, maybe they're doing it a little differently, but we are now about to execute that piece. And by the way, they actually put a deadline for this in the bill of January 1st, 2021.
I'm just trying to think through the mechanics. What would have to happen, in my opinion, is they'd have to have the individual consumers, the average Joe and Jane, would have to have a reserve account with the Fed, just like the JP Morgans and the Goldman Sachs. Now, most people might not think that that's a big deal, but then what happens is the Fed or the government is able to monitor every single transaction, every single thing you do. So you go onto the internet and buy XYZ thing that you might not want to talk about. Well, the Fed's going to know that. The government is going to know that. I mean, just think through the consequences of how that slippery slope with Big Brother that we get into. But I take it to the next step, and if they print up the bank reserves to put it into the accounts for, let's call it UBI, or the digital dollar with stimulus checks, and then you have to download your app in order to spend the money, then not only can they charge you an interest rate for holding the money, but couldn't they just have that money expire within a certain time frame to try to create the velocity? I mean, how would that work on top of the negative interest rates?
Exactly. And you probably went in. I mean, actually, when a currency is dying, that's a very typical thing. You could just look over at Zimbabwe, and they did it 3 times, and they actually print an expiration date on the cash. But to your point too, in this bill, you know what these accounts are called? Fed accounts.
Right.
So you have the digital dollar in a digital wallet, and they don't print it. It is just a ledger entry.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Right.
And the Fed account is actually, it looks like, it smells like, and it tastes like a regular bank account, because they know they've got to keep things as close to what you're used to as possible. And then they entice you. So no fees. They pay you interest, initially anyway. They pay you interest. There's no minimum balance. There's no maximum balance. They kind of danced around the overdraft fees, so I'm not really sure about that because they didn't really specify.
Right, right.
And they also are saying in here that they will reimburse the banks for all costs. So the banks cannot cancel these accounts because of profitability. They're going to make sure, because it is direct. And for governments, I mean, why do governments care about that? Because for them, it's about taxation. And in all of my research, how many times I have read about lifetime taxation. And if they have access to everything in your account, if they want it, they just pull it out. And what are you going to do about it? Nothing.
Yeah. I don't know if they'd even need to do that. Not that I would put it past them, but I don't know that they'd even need to do that, because if we think about the economic equation, that M2 plus velocity equals nominal GDP. Right. I mean, if you look at how many currency units are in circulation and however many times those currency units trade hands, that's going to equal your nominal GDP. Now, of course, we only care about real GDP, but that's going to be nominal GDP, and that's what they need to really go parabolic in order to pay off this 26 trillion plus in on-balance sheet debt. Not talking about the off-balance sheet debt, but just on-balance sheet. And that's really, I think, one of their main objectives is to just deleverage this debt through an inflationary spiral, call it. So if they can control the M2 money supply and velocity, they can control the entire equation. And then they can just turn the dial up and down on however much debt however much debt burden they want to reduce by paying it back with cheaper currency units.
Exactly.
So I don't think people really understand the power that it gives the government just by going from, I mean, I don't even like fiat currency, but at least it's a green piece of paper in my hand, Lynette.
Right.
This
You
digital dollar.
It is a debt instrument that has a zero coupon. In other words, it doesn't charge you interest. It doesn't pay you interest. This is the problem for them going deeply below zero. They've got to get rid of it. But if they go in and they take it away from you, well, now you're hackled on, no, what are you taking away my dollar? They want you to volunteer it. And a lot of people have volunteered it during this corona pandemic.